In this training video, we're going to look at the subtotaling feature within Microsoft Excel. Now, subtotaling is a really useful feature whereby, for example, in the data we're looking at, say I wanted to know what the total days stayed are for each kennel. So, for example, in this data, we have Alsatians kennel, Borders kennel, Terriers kennel, West Highland. So there's different kinds of kennels within a business where different dogs are staying and different breeds of dogs. So the idea is to look at each kennel and find out how long are these dogs staying in these particular kennels. So the first thing you need to do with any kind of subtotaling is to sort the data by what you're trying to subtotal. So in this example, we're trying to subtotal by kennel. So to start any subtotal off, you click anywhere in your data. You don't have to be in the correct column. You can click anywhere. Now, before you subtotal, the key to getting subtotaling right is to make sure whatever you're trying to subtotal is sorted correctly in order. So if I left the kennel as is, whereby Alsatians is in different places, Terriers in different places, this would cause the subtotal not to be effective, and it'll just give you many little chunks all throughout your data. Whereas if you group and sort everything together, so Alsatians are all together, Terriers are all together, Borders are all together, this will give you the ability to subtotal very effectively. So the first thing we're going to do is do a sort, and the data will then be ready for subtotaling. Now, to do a sort, you can click anywhere in your data. So I'm going to click, for example, in the breed column. I'm going to go to my data tab, and I'm going to choose the sort and the sort and filter from the tab. So the big sort with the little white button, this allows me to sort. So it says, well, what do you want to sort on? So in this example, I want to sort on kennel. And A to Z is fine. Z to A or A to Z, as long as it's sorted in an order, that's fine. I'll leave it A to Z in this example. So we're sorting alphabetically for the kennel column. And there we go. We've got all the Alsatians together. We've got all the Borders together. Now, if I were to ask somebody to do this who maybe attends courses with me in face-to-face training, who didn't know how to use subtotal, and I said, can you give me a total of each of the different kennels? Let me give you an example of what they'll do. So what they'll do, they'll say, okay, well, here's the kennels. Here's the Alsatian kennels. There's all the days. They'll either highlight the days and look down the bottom right to see the sum is the total of 70. And then they'll write it down on a piece of paper. So they'll either give it one at a time and write it down, or what they might do is insert a blank row directly below each of the areas. So in this example, I'm going to have a blank row below Alsatians. I'm going to go, you can either right click it or you can go home, insert cheat row. And what they'll then do an auto sum. So they'll go formulas, auto sum, sum, enter, and there's your 70 again. So they know the answer is 70, but then they keep on inserting a blank row for every break. So after Borders, they'll do one, Newfoundlands, they'll do one, St. Bernard, and so on. So this is, if you've got a big data set and you are doing this all the time, it's going to take you time and you might make mistakes. So there's a way of getting around this using what's called subtotaling. So I'm going to delete the blank row now. Okay, now the data is sorted, it's ready for subtotaling. To do a subtotal, you click anywhere in your data when it's been sorted. So it's now sorted in this correct order. Click anywhere, and it's the data tab. And your subtotal is in the outline section of the ribbon, and here's the button for subtotal. So straight away the data is selected, and it's now telling me this data is ready to be used. So at each change in means, well, what are you trying to subtotal? Well, in this example, we are trying to subtotal kennel. So we want to know at each change in kennel, so that's what I'm trying to subtotal, what is the total number of days? Well, the total means the sum. So for example, sum means total. Well, you could not only use sum, you could say, well, what's the average days stayed in the kennel? What's the maximum days in a kennel? So you can do lots and lots, not just one area. In this example, we're going to start off with sum. So I now know at each change in kennel, so as soon as it goes from Alsatians to borders, it's going to give me a total for each individual area. Now straight away Excel is clever enough to pick up the days field or column to subtotal, because it needs to subtotal numbers. So in this example we got days, but if your data had lots and lots of columns with different numbers, you've got to tell it what the subtotal. So you've got to put the ticks in yourself. In this example, it's picked up days itself. So it wants to subtotal the total, which means the sum, days. So total days for each kennel is what would have happened if we kept on doing the auto sum for each single kennel when I showed you what people who attend my face-to-face sessions might do if they didn't know how to use this feature. So this is going to be a lot quicker than they would do it if they didn't know how to use subtotaling. Can I click OK now? And look, straight away, there's your 70. So Alsatians total, I've now got borders total, so on, so on. Each one's given its own individual total. I've even got a grand total. Now this gets better if we look towards the left-hand side of the screen. You'll see a 3, 2, 1. So 3 is all the data. 2 shows you all of the headings for each of the kennels. So Alsatians, borders. Now if I wanted to show the information or detail behind one of the headings, say for example, borders. I wanted to know, well, what's behind the 71 days? Well, if I click the plus next to borders, it then shows me which dogs are making up the 71 days. It's very, very clever. This can go a step further. If I click the number 1, I get the grand total of all the kennels. So you can click on different areas and see different views, and you can print with different views. So really, really useful way of managing and manipulating data. I can add to the subtotal, so I don't have to only have one subtotal, I can have multiple subtotals. So if I wanted to have multiple subtotals, I click back in my data, back to my subtotal feature. This time, I'm still going to have at each change in kennel, which is fine in this example, but I don't want to use the sum, the total. I also want to have the average. Now, if you listen to the words I just used there, also, so I'm not updating the sum, I'm going to also have the average as well as the sum. Now, the way I do this is by deselecting replace current subtotal. So all I'm going to do is take the tick out. Now that's going to allow me to have multiple subtotals. In this example, not only the total of each day, but the average of each day. I'm going to click OK, and there we go. We've now got the average and the total. Now I can keep on going, because if I look towards the left-hand side, I've got 4, 3, 2, 1. So 4 is the top level. 3 shows you the average and the total. And again, you can do your pluses and see the data. 2 gives you your totals and your grand average down the bottom. And 1 gives you the grand average and the grand total. So quite useful for seeing how data can change using these subtotals. I could add another one. So I'm going to click back in my data, and I could say, okay, another subtotal. So I might want to say, what's the maximum days stayed in each of these kennels? So average to max, still going to be the days. And I know I've now taken the replace at the current subtotals. Now all of a sudden, it's going to add a third one. Okay, and now I've got the maximum days in any kennel, the average, and the total. And as you can see, another number appears. So I've got 5 levels now. So 4 shows me information. It shows me the max, the average, the totals. I can do the pluses again, show the data. 3 shows me new data. 2 shows me data with max included. And 1 shows me data. So this is the way the subtotal feature can help visualize information within Microsoft Excel. It's a very, very useful feature. Now you might say, well, how do I get back to my standard information without pressing undo all the time? So I'm going to go back to my top level data, and this is the recommendation, to go back to your top level, which in this case is number 5. Click in the data, go to your subtotal icon, and then you can click remove all. So remove all will actually take you back to the raw data. So remove all, and now I'm back to where I was before I started this off. Now you might say, well, what happens if I didn't want to have I didn't want lots and lots of subtotals? Well, if you click back in the data and you subtotal, now at the moment we've left it off where we've got replace current subtotal. So this would just keep on adding and adding if you kept on adding. So this time I might say, okay, we only want to see one at a time. So this time I'll put replace current subtotals back on. By doing that, we'll now have the information kennel. We'll leave it to total. And we'll say days, but I have got the replace back on now. Click OK. Right, it still gives me my total, 70, but now I don't want the average to be another additional subtotal. I want it instead of. So I'm going to go back to my subtotal. I've got the check in for replace current subtotals. I don't want the sum, which is presently showing me. I'm going to have the average. I click OK, and now it's replaced it. So you can use the subtotal feature as you need to make the data work for you. So you can either have lots and lots of subtotals, or you can choose one to replace another. But it's worth having a look at what the subtotal feature can do, because it's a very, very powerful and quite simplistic way of looking at information within Excel. So to finish off this video, I'm going to just take the data back to its original settings, leaving the sort on. So I'll just click back in my data, subtotal, and remove all. And now that's back to the raw data without any subtotals added to my data. So this concludes the training video on subtotaling information in Microsoft Excel.